Question?
Hello, sir. So I'm interested, since this is such a broad-ranging conflict. It says we're at war. I'd like to hear your understanding of who the enemy is, what they want, and why you understand, in your understanding, why they're the enemy. Thank
you. In the broadest sense, the struggle that we're engaged in is a reflection of the fact that there's a struggle within the Muslim faith, within that religion. A handful, a relatively small number of violent extremists are trying to hijack that religion and seize it and enforce their view on the hundreds of millions of Muslims that exist in the world who do not agree with the violent extremists. That struggle is going to play itself out, and it won't be fast. It'll take time. The aspects of it that we see in Afghanistan, or we see in Iraq, or we see in the bombings in Bali or London or elsewhere in the world have mixtures of things. There is what I've just characterized of that struggle within that faith. But there are also people, for example, in Afghanistan who simply want to seize back power. In Iraq, people who would like to seize back power and prevail. The Sunnis ran that country for decades, and the Shia are the majority, and they've now got the majority of the votes. And there are clearly Sunnis who would prefer that not be the case. There are also criminal elements that are involved in the activities, the killing, the violence that's taking place. There are also struggles within the Shia community. We see the Sadr forces arrayed against the non-Sadr Shia forces within the country. So the enemies are really, in the first instance, the violent extremists who are determined to try to impose their will on their fellow Muslims, to destabilize the neighboring Muslim states and reimpose a caliphate in that part of the world and in other parts of the world, including Southern Europe and Africa and parts of Asia. That's an enemy. There are also people who are using are making mischief with respect to the divisions that exist, for example, in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in Lebanon and what we've seen in Israel. You have the activities of Iran and Syria. Iran is obviously trying to influence what happens in Afghanistan, its neighbor. It's trying to influence what happens in Iraq, its neighbor. It is unlike a war, a major conflict, or the Cold War, where you can identify the Soviet Union, you know what their military capabilities are, it's reasonably predictable and sustained over a period of time, your intelligence can focus on it, you can get quite good at it, and it does not change that fast. The number of submarines changes, or the number of ballistic missiles may change, the number of aircraft or the types, but the nature of the problem is fairly constant. Although technologically advancing continuously. That's not true. I mean, you talk to General Casey about what's going on in Iraq, and he'll go back and describe the different phases that the enemy has, the different faces of the enemy over the past 3.5 years, and he can describe how it's changed. The mix has changed. He now sees power struggles going on within these factions, the Kurds and the Sunnis, and they're going to have debates about federalism. They're going to have debates about reconciliation process and what should be done. And the question is, how do you move the debates from weapons to words? And that is what they're going through and what they're trying to do. The idea that the reason there are problems in the world is the United States is baloney. We are not what's wrong with the world. I had a friend once, he was asked by a UN organization to chair a committee, and the committee was to be titled, in effect, What Causes Poverty? And the orientation was to study that and have the international community address that. And he declined. He said, I'm not going to do that. And they said, well, why? And he said, well, because the implication of that is that the natural state of man is to be prosperous, and that there's something in the world that's causing people to be poor. And he said, that is not the case. The natural state of man is to be poor. And there are certain things happening in the world to make people more prosperous and more successful. And that is the orientation we should have. We should be looking at what works, not what is imposing harshness or difficulty or disadvantage on the rest of the world. And any movement in this world that begins with the concept that something is denying them the opportunities, I think is doomed. Because if you look down from Mars on this globe and ask yourself who's doing well, I mean, just take the Korean Peninsula. Same people in the north, same people in the south. Same resources in the north, same resources in the south. And a satellite picture down shows in the south all the electricity and the energy. The south has got the 10th or 12th strongest economy on the face of the earth. And the people in the north are starving. And what's the difference? Not the people, not the resources. The only difference is the system. The South has a free political system and a free economic system and opportunity for people, and the North has a vicious dictatorship and it has a command economy. And that is the difference. And it seems to me that the people who are suggesting, I mean, Osama bin Laden wasn't some poor kid. He came from a very wealthy, prosperous family, and Zawahiri's a doctor, and these folks who are managing this process, they're not the ones strapping on suicide belts and getting killed, that's for darn sure. They're just fine, thank you. But those folks are not people who've been put upon by the rest of the world or by the West. They're people who've made free choices, that they've decided that they want to try to impose their views on everybody else. And that strikes at the very heart of free people. And that's what we are, people who want to be able to say what we want and think what we want and go where we want, work where we want, and get up in the morning and send our kids to school and have high confidence they'll come home.